On the evening of October 21, 1978, a young Australian pilot took off in a small aircraft. It was supposed to be a routine flight. About 40 minutes later, he radioed air traffic control with a strange question. Was there another aircraft flying nearby? The controller replied that there was no other traffic in the area, but the pilot insisted he could see something. He said it was moving far too fast, that it had passed directly above him, that he couldn't identify what it was. Then came a sentence that, nearly 50 years later, is still debated around the world.
It's not an aircraft.
A few seconds later, the transmission was cut off. The airplane vanished. The pilot was never seen again, and to this day no one can say with certainty what really happened that night over Bass Strait. On October 21, 1978, Frederick Valentich was just 20 years old. He lived in Australia and had dreamed of becoming a professional pilot since childhood. Nearly all of his free time revolved around airplanes. Hour by hour, he built up his flight experience, hoping that one day he would earn a place in commercial aviation. But that dream wasn't coming easily. During his training, Frederick failed several examinations, and his instructors believed he still lacked the experience needed to fly professionally. His record already included airspace violations and mistakes made during training flights. None of that meant he was reckless. If anything, he was simply a young pilot still learning, determined to one day make flying his career. That Saturday evening, he was preparing for what should have been another routine flight. A small single-engine Cessna 182L stood ready for departure. According to his flight plan, Frederick would leave Moorabbin Airport, just outside Melbourne, cross Bass Strait, and continue toward King Island. The flight was expected to take about an hour. The weather was calm. Nothing suggested that this journey would be any different from dozens of others before it. Years later, questions would emerge about the real purpose of the flight. Some believed Frederick was flying to pick up acquaintances. Others claimed that no one had been expecting him on the island at all. But by then, none of that mattered anymore. At 6:19 p.m., his aircraft lifted off the runway and turned south. For the air traffic controllers, it was just another ordinary evening. For Frederick, it was the last flight of his life. The sun was already sinking below the horizon as the small Cessna 182L continued south across Bass Strait. Below the aircraft, nothing but dark water. Ahead, King Island, now less than an hour away. For Frederick, it was a familiar route. The engine ran smoothly. The aircraft held a steady altitude of about 4,500 feet. His radio connection with Melbourne Air Traffic Control remained clear. Nothing suggested that this routine evening flight was only minutes away from becoming one of the most debated aviation mysteries of the 20th century. At 7:06 p.m., Frederick broke the routine radio traffic for the first time. Instead of another position report, he asked the controller an unusual question.
Melbourne, is there any known traffic below 5,000 feet?
His voice was calm. There was no panic. It sounded more like a pilot trying to identify another aircraft he had spotted in the distance. The controller immediately checked the radar. There was nothing. No other aircraft were being tracked in the area.
Delta Sierra Juliet, negative. There is no known traffic below 5,000 feet.
For a few seconds, the frequency fell silent. It seemed the question had been answered. Then Frederick keyed the microphone again. This time, his voice carried a different tone.
It appears to be a large aircraft below 5,000 feet.
Another brief silence followed. The controller searched for a simple explanation. Perhaps the pilot had made a mistake. Perhaps it was another aircraft that, for some reason, wasn't showing up on radar. But Frederick's next report made the situation far more difficult to explain. He said the object had just passed directly over his aircraft. By his estimate, it had been only a few hundred meters away. The controller continued asking calm, routine questions. Meanwhile, Frederick was trying to understand what was flying beside him. He wasn't talking about anything supernatural. He wasn't jumping to extraordinary conclusions. He was simply describing what he could see with his own eyes. And that's exactly why the next few minutes of radio traffic are still debated today. This isn't a story told years later by someone trying to remember what happened. It's the real-time voice of a pilot, trying to make sense of something as it was happening. After Frederick's first report, the controller remained calm. Situations like this weren't unheard of. Pilots sometimes mistook bright planets, helicopters, or reflections for other aircraft. So far, nothing suggested that anything truly unusual was happening, but the next transmissions began to eliminate each of those possibilities.
Can you describe the object?
The reply came almost immediately.
It's long, I can't identify the type. It's moving at a tremendous speed.
The controller continued asking short, routine questions, trying to gather as much information as possible.
Confirm, is it an aircraft?
There was a brief pause, then Frederick answered.
I can't say, it just passed over me, and now it's approaching again.
At that moment, the conversation no longer sounded like a routine position report. It sounded as though the object was circling the aircraft. Each new transmission was more unsettling than the last, and yet Frederick's voice remained remarkably calm. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't claiming that he was under attack. He was simply trying to describe what he was seeing. A few seconds later, he transmitted one final message. It would become the most quoted line in the entire case.
It's hovering and it's not an aircraft.
The controller immediately tried to get more information.
Repeat, what are you observing now?
There was no reply. Instead of Frederick's voice, a strange metallic sound filled the frequency. According to the controller, it resembled scraping metal or a continuous metallic grinding noise. It lasted for about 17 seconds. Then the recording ended as suddenly as it had begun. After that, silence. The controller called Frederick several more times.
Delta Sierra Juliet. Melbourne calling Delta Sierra Juliet. Do you read?
There was no response. The small Cessna 182L, carrying a 20-year-old pilot, had simply vanished. Those were the last words Frederick Valentich would ever say, that another human being would hear. In the first few minutes after contact was lost, no one spoke of a mysterious disappearance. Situations like this had happened before. Radio communication could fail. An aircraft could leave an area of reliable reception. A pilot might simply switch frequencies. The controllers kept calling Frederick, expecting him to answer at any moment, but the frequency remained silent. Once it became clear that contact would not be restored, a search and rescue operation was launched. Aircraft were dispatched to the estimated area of the disappearance. Later, search vessels joined the operation, combing the waters of Bass Strait. It was never an easy place to search. Even in calm weather, the powerful currents could carry wreckage far from the actual crash site within a matter of hours. Hour after hour passed. Aircraft swept across the surface of the water. Their crews searched below, hoping to spot even the smallest clue: an oil slick, a life jacket, a piece of the aircraft, anything that could reveal where it had gone down. But the waters of Bass Strait revealed nothing. No airplane, no wreckage, no sign of the pilot, nothing. As time went on, the search area grew even larger. Investigators began considering different possibilities. Had Frederick changed course? Could he have turned back? Might he have attempted an emergency landing somewhere else? But none of those possibilities could be confirmed. With each passing day, the questions only multiplied. A few days later, the official search was called off. The final report acknowledged the obvious. The aircraft had disappeared, and with it, the only person who could have explained what happened during the final minutes of the flight. It was the complete absence of evidence that transformed the case into a true mystery. Had the search teams found the wreckage, the investigation would most likely have ended with a routine accident report. Had they recovered the pilot, at least part of the story might have been reconstructed. But they found nothing. only a brief recording of the final radio transmissions, one that has grown more haunting with every passing year. After the search came to an end, Frederick Valentich's disappearance became the responsibility of investigators. They had one question to answer: what happened during the final minutes of the flight? The theory of a mid-air collision was dismissed almost immediately. During Frederick's final radio transmissions, air traffic control confirmed that no other aircraft had been identified anywhere near his position. Civilian and military radar records revealed nothing that could explain what he had reported, but Frederick's own words remained.
It's hovering and it's not an aircraft.
Those words would define the case for decades to come. Investigators began searching for a more conventional explanation. The most likely possibility, they concluded, was spatial disorientation. A night flight over Bass Strait can be challenging even for experienced pilots. When the horizon disappears, leaving nothing but dark water below and an empty sky above, it becomes remarkably easy to lose any reliable sense of orientation. Given Frederick's limited experience, the theory seemed entirely plausible. But the investigation ran into a problem. That explanation could account for the crash itself. It couldn't explain something else. Why had the pilot spent several minutes reporting an unknown object? And what produced the strange metallic sound that ended the recording? It was those unanswered questions that eventually gave rise to the theory that would make the case famous far beyond Australia. Some researchers suggested that Frederick had genuinely encountered an unidentified object. Over the years, several people claimed they had seen unusual lights over Bass Strait that same evening, and the media quickly connected those reports to the pilot's final transmissions. But that was as far as the evidence went. No photographs, no recordings, no physical evidence. As the decades passed, other theories emerged. Some pointed to a mechanical failure. Others suggested that Frederick had staged his own disappearance, but none of them could be supported by convincing evidence. In the end, the official investigation reached an unusual conclusion. The cause of the disappearance could not be determined. Today, nearly 50 years later, we know almost no more about Frederick Valentich's final moments than the controllers did on that October evening. We have the recording of his voice. We have the official reports. We have decades of investigation. But the final question ever asked over the radio has never been answered.
Repeat, what are you observing now?
There was no reply. And that is why the disappearance of Frederick Valentich remains one of Australia's most enduring aviation mysteries.